On today's episode of Chasing Financial Equality, we're speaking with Kate O'Keefe, a serial entrepreneur and innovator who's worked in Silicon Valley and Australia. The introduction I give Kate will be longer than usual because, well, it needs to be. Kate is the co-founder and CEO of HeatSeeker, a cutting-edge platform that helps businesses by running AI-driven market experiments to improve their growth strategies. HeatSeeker's approach allows businesses to gather real-time customer insights and make data-driven decisions to improve product market fit and accelerate growth. In addition to her role at HeatSeeker, Kate serves on the board of Birchal, Australia's leading crowdsourced equity funding platform, where she focuses on helping startups secure funding and democratising access to entrepreneurship for Australians of all backgrounds. Kate's experience spans both the startup world and large corporations, having served as a partner at BCG Digital Ventures. During her time there, she helped launch and scale numerous corporate ventures, bringing Silicon Valley-style startup methodologies to Australian businesses. She also founded Cisco's hyper-innovation Living Labs, abbreviated to CHILL, a program that drove innovation to tackle some of the world's biggest business challenges. In the lead-up to this interview, I spoke with Dom Pym, a well-known investor in Australia and the founder of Australia's most successful bank startup, and Fiona Triarca, Kate's co-founder and cousin. They told me more about Kate than anybody has ever offered to share about any other guests we've had on this show, and I think that's a testament to the impression Kate leaves on people. Dom told me that he thinks Kate is the most overqualified founder in Australia, and spoke of her experience in Silicon Valley delivering hyper-innovation. He told me that Kate doesn't suffer fools and that her unrelenting horsepower takes no prisoners. I also spoke informally to Kirsten Hunter, who's known Kate for some time. All three told one very consistent story about Kate. She's direct. And because of her knowledge base, her experience, her gut instinct, and her values, that directness is a superpower. Fiona said directness builds trust, and you always know exactly where you stand with Kate. It's a rare trait in business and in life. Kirsten told me that Kate is a business nerd, someone who is obsessed with getting things done and who hates inefficiency. And Dom backed this with numerous stories of Kate going into businesses and rapidly turning them around. Fiona said, I've met a lot of people who've made it to the levels Kate has, who talk a big game with big vision and big ideas, but who don't do the work. Kate's not like that. When she says she'll do something, she does it. No fluff, no excuses. It's not just talk, it's action. She values keeping her word and expects the same. Kate's deep expertise in corporate innovation, market experimentation, and scaling businesses, combined with her commitment to diversity and inclusion, make her a unique voice in the conversation about how entrepreneurship can be leveraged to create more equitable systems. In this episode, we'll dive into Kate's journey, her work with startups, and her insights into the intersection of technology, growth, and equality. Kate, welcome to Chasing Financial Equality.
Thanks, Kane. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, you've said that HeatSeeker helps businesses test their gut instincts through controlled experiments. Can you explain a bit more how that works in practice?
Yeah, HeatSeeker is all about taking a number of different options for a product, a value proposition, an idea, some language, and allowing you to create a slate of ads that you can place live in a controlled experiment on social media, targeting your target audience. And then we see how those ads perform and use that to make decisions about what language, product, feature is most likely to be successful in your market. It comes from kind of this rapid prototyping idea. Prototyping is so powerful because it goes beyond what we say to something quite physical in the world. And likewise, this methodology of creating a series of ads, placing them live is a little bit like rapid prototyping. We take the winner of the beauty contest, if you like, and use that to really validate ideas and move more quickly.
In the past, a lot of startups, a lot of businesses have used the notion of surveying potential customers about what they might do. Do you find that this is a more effective way of finding out what customers will do?
Yeah. So the problem with surveys and polls is that what people say and what people do is different. We don't mean to lie. It's just really different when people say, would you like this or that? Sure, I like that. It's really different, though, when you've got your own credit card and your own money in your hand. What are you prepared to part with that money for? The behavior is often really, really different. And we just have to look at the recent US elections to know that, there's a real difference between, what people are prepared to respond to when they participate in market research. And I find that to be really dangerous. It's like this chasm or a cliff that we can all fall off when we listen to flawed data. And we're all hungry for data. We're hungry for confidence, especially since sort of survey style research is quant. You can't argue with numbers, can you, Kane? 71% of people want something. Do they though? And so that's what HeatSeeker is looking to replace. Nobody's paid to participate in a HeatSeeker experiment. You either click on an ad because you want it or you don't. It's a real ad in the real world. Nobody's paid for their participation. Works just as well in a business context as in a consumer context. And we just want to help businesses make better products, make fewer mistakes. We want to empty landfills of products that nobody wants, and help everybody be more successful.
A lot of people listening to this are in the startup space and generally in business. The mantra, ship fast and iterate. Do you think that stems from that chasm between expectation and action that companies see in consumer behavior?
Yeah. I think we all know what ship fast and iterate means, doing as a form of learning. The issue is it's not just shipping it fast, Kane. You've got to get the data. You've got to ship it to someone. You got to put it in someone's hands. Otherwise, you've just built something shitty. So I think what we're looking to do with this sort of ad-based approach is put something in front of thousands and thousands of people and see if they love it. So I'm a huge believer in sort of ship fast and iterate. The first version of HeatSeeker was live and operational online within about 6 weeks. So we believe passionately in that, but don't forget the step, which is it's got to be in the hands of your target market or in the hands of a huge number of people. And you're using the performance in the hands of a really diverse group to decide who your target market is. So, yeah, and that will help startups decide better who they're shipping for. That'll help them with their investor narrative, and that will help them sort of shamelessly sacrifice everything at the altar of the right target market.
We heard in the intro that Fiona, your cousin, is one of your co-founders. Can you tell me how you recruited Atlassian's head of product, Rutger Coolan, to become a co-founder?
Yeah, it was a pretty wild story. I believe really deeply in the craft of great product management. It's actually an emerging craft here in Australia. In California, where I spent most of my career, the craft of sort of a first-class product technician, sort of that understands the discipline of shipping and building product, and bringing together first-class engineering and design is, it's a bit more advanced there. So I really wanted somebody with that kind of California-style product management background so they could create that discipline within HeatSeeker. And I hadn't found them locally. My husband, Chris, asked me to take a week off to go hiking in New Zealand. We have a young family. It's difficult to get alone time, but it's something that we both respect and we're both passionate about. He really needed a long forest path. And so that's what he did. He flew and he did the Kepler Trail in New Zealand, and it was snowing when he was there. And in fact, they closed the trail, and being German and stubborn and pig-headed, he went anyway. And whilst he was sort of shivering at night in this hut, another hiker who similarly ignored the warnings, Rutger Coolan, stumbled into this cabin. I make it sound a lot more romantic than it probably was. And while they were there, they got to talking, of course, about what they both did. And my husband mentioned, my wife is building this incredible company, and you sound like you've got the kind of the skills that she's after. And I thought that was a really good job interview. If you're that kind of person. If you're the kind of person who braves the snow and the sleet and, 13 hours of walking, then you're the kind of person with a determination that I'd like to have in my startup.
I think this really principled and formal approach to leading product development is something I'm learning a lot more about. A friend of mine, Scotty Allen, is an American. He brings that American approach to the Australian landscape. And I agree with you. I think it's something that's very, very much lacking here. Product leaders here don't have the same methodologies that they have in the States. Dom Pym was, through his family office, the first investor in HeatSeeker. And at the time, you couldn't find a single other investor that understood the business and the opportunity and could justify the enterprise value. And yet, last year, you won Company of the Year at the Pause Awards. Have you got better at communicating HeatSeeker, or has the landscape changed?
Well, Dom was absolutely the first, but I do want to frame up that first check came within only a couple months of us getting started and really sort of clarifying what we were doing. And since then, HeatSeeker has gone on to raise $1.7 million for its pre-seed round. So we've done all right when it comes to communicating the value proposition. However, we are creating a new category. So, we're coming in to the market and saying to folks that are marketing great products, folks that are building great products, and folks that are building and incubating innovations within the enterprise. And we're saying, this technique that you learn about in university that you've been doing forever, we really believe that market research in its current form, I would say flawed, is at least incomplete in its ability to give you first class in the wild market experimentation data on how different products, value propositions, language, features, go-to-market options will perform. Should your product be buy one, get one free, or should it be 50% off? Well, we can tell you that because we can test it live, and we can test it really quickly. So within 6 to 9 days, you can have the answer with certainty so you can build with more confidence. So yeah, you're right. The framing up a whole new category for how we think every enterprise, every great company should make data-driven decisions, should de-risk the decision that they're making. It is new and different. Bringing something new to the Australian market. It did take us a minute. We leverage AI in our tech stack. It took us a minute to frame up that AI is the least interesting thing about what we're doing. The most interesting thing about what we're doing is instantly giving you access to everybody on social media, everybody on LinkedIn, everybody on Facebook, everybody on Instagram, and making them your testers in the wild so that you can build with confidence.
In a small sign that I might be getting better at interviewing, my next question was about AI. Can you tell us about this within HeatSeeker?
Yeah, well, that's a great question and one of my favorites. So one of the first things that AI does in your HeatSeeker journey is ingest a lot of information about your business, your product, and also your competitors' products. We build a bit of a corpus of data about you, your product, and your sector so that when it comes time to build your experiment, we do so from a really rich position of different language options, different ideas, different ways to talk about features. So we're basically trying to alleviate as much as we can of the mental load of crafting an experiment. Not everybody does sort of executes the discipline of great experimentation, but those that do, it takes a whole team, to kind of write the copy, do the picture, sign off on the brand. HeatSeeker is trying to replace all of those people so that you can do it on your own, as a marketing leader or as a product manager and do it really quickly. Our AI process of scraping your competitors means you jump into HeatSeeker, knows exactly who you are, makes it really easy to get started. You tell our chatbot what you're trying to achieve. So I'm trying to identify what's the best buying driver or the best competitive advantage of this new product versus others. You type that in, that's what I want to know. And then HeatSeeker will create for you a first draft of different options that you can choose for. You can type in a couple more. So for buying drivers, for instance, for HeatSeeker, do people want to buy HeatSeeker? Do people want to do market experiments so that they can ship faster? Or do they want to make data-driven decisions? Or do they buy HeatSeeker because they want to bring stakeholders with them on their marketing or product journey, or do they want to ship better features faster? So these are all different, what we call buying drivers, who will propose those to you, give them a tweak, sign them off, and then HeatSeeker will create a slate of 5, 6, 7, 8 ads. We control all the variables. The image will be the same. We'll propose an image, but you can sub it for one of your own. The AI will create those ads for you. Then we post that experiment for you through the APIs of either Meta or LinkedIn, place those ads for you live in the market. The minute they hit statistical significance in terms of the performance of that experiment, we pull those ads down for you, and then we use AI to interpret the results. So we have a huge stack of sort of first-class prompt engineering and data science that allows you not just to get answers from this experiment, but also to look through every experiment that you've done, compare and contrast, pull a little bit of signal that's been showing up in the noise of all your experiments over time. We can even look back over your previous ad experiments, sort of ad campaigns, to compare and contrast the marketing activities you've had on social. And then we give you the insights that you need to make great decisions. This is the most important buying driver when you're selling to women in this part of the world who have this interest. And when you promote that first in your marketing, or when you're building your features, they should align to that so that your whole product marketing and build process will be more successful.
Listening to you talk about the process of experimentation and the data being collected as a result, my mind goes straight to the potential for you to build a very large data repository. Is that part of your plan as well?
Yeah. So Kane, I obviously spent a decade when I was in California working for one of the biggest tech companies of the world, Cisco. And so that deep tech, how do we leverage data and technology to give companies an unfair advantage and surface this kind of really practical value? So that was always what HeatSeeker was going to do. So you're right, HeatSeeker is looking to build enormous pattern recognition. When you're marketing to a segment that looks like this, they much prefer you to have pink hair over brown hair. They're going to make assumptions about you that are the following. And so when you market to them, this is going to be more successful. So that sort of pattern recognition already gives HeatSeeker users an unfair advantage, means that they have the benefit of enormous learning that we've done over the hundreds of experiments we've already run. And that will only continue to reinforce over time. So yeah, we like to think it will give you an unfair advantage and lower the cost of all your experiments. The total cost of ownership of HeatSeeker falls over time because your experiments are more likely to be successful because you're standing on the shoulders of every other experiment that we've done.
So while HeatSeeker isn't a social impact company per se, your personal commitment to diversity of thought and access is pretty well known. Dom Pym told us that he met you at PauseFest, where you spoke on hyper-innovation, and these are some of Dom's words. We hit it off immediately, bonding over what we could do to disrupt the Australian startup ecosystem. Her idea was a simple one. At the time, the entire ecosystem had about $800 million in capital, and she thought we could start a new $800 million female-led VC fund to invest in female founders exclusively. And this is a conversation I've had quite extensively with Kirsten Hunter about doing a very similar thing. And I want to talk to you about sort of your evolution of thought from that to now, where you're on the board of Birchal, Australia's largest crowdfunding platform, and you've raised funding and you work with a very active investor in the ecosystem. Having a think about how your thoughts on this topic have evolved, how do you think the startup ecosystem now can best support women and underrepresented founders when it comes to securing funding and scaling their businesses?
Yeah, so the best way to answer that is, my thinking has evolved. And there's two ways that I'm looking to support diversity and the success of women. One is, a part of HeatSeeker really is making sure that the best ideas win every time. And there's no point, Kane, in us arguing between you and me about what the next feature is that should be in this product, or your creative idea versus my creative idea. We don't have to have those arguments anymore. We can just ship them both as HeatSeeker variants and see how they perform. Now, In addition to my time in the startup ecosystem, I've spent a lot of time in corporate America, both through Cisco and through Boston Consulting Group. And we spend a lot of time, we waste a lot of time talking, arguing, soapboxing. And of course, the success of not just women, but all diverse voices depends on the best ideas winning. And so a lot of what we're trying to achieve with HeatSeeker is just making sure that the best ideas win and that there's no point arguing and that the argument's not going to be won by the loudest voice, the whitest voice, the malest voice, the most senior voice, the oldest voice. They're not going to necessarily win anymore if we take a deeper commitment to shutting up, shipping all the different options to the world, having real people in the real world respond to that, and then using that data to make better decisions.
In many respects, that points to the significance of having a diverse team or a diverse group of people contributing to the ideas that then get tested.
Exactly right. I've always said that you need a team that reflects the ICP that you're selling to, but you also need a really diverse slate of muscles and skills and technologies and techniques. And so you're right. The more broadly we can test, the more options and different options we can put into the marketplace, the more likely we are to find one that resonates really deeply with our market. So that's the first way I like to make a contribution, and how we want to change primarily the enterprise through HeatSeeker, but for anyone who uses the product in order to be more successful. We believe that data-backed decision-making is a win for diversity and inclusion. The other piece, and why I've chosen to build a rocket ship startup, a unicorn, as I call it, instead of a VC fund, is the best thing that I can do, I believe right now, the best contribution that I can make to support female founders is to be one of them, is to found a wildly successful startup, is to make the 50, 60, 70 investors that have backed me and Fiona and now Rudger as our late co-founder, to make them a life-changing amount of money as a result of their investment in this majority female-founded startup, and also create, this is like hooking into Dom's vision, intergenerational success and wealth for the ecosystem that has been spearheaded by female founders. So I've always said, when people ask me about, what do I think we need to do to back female founders and what do I think I should do? And my answer is always just to be wildly successful, to make a life-changing amount of money for the people who are backing female founders like me.
Overlays almost perfectly with what Cindy Gallop told us in response to that very same question, is to make an obscenely large amount of money.
Obscenely large, life-changing amount of money. And, often as women, we feel like we need to shy away from that. And we all need to insist that everything we're doing is impact-driven. But making it an obscene amount of money and making that contribution to the startup ecosystem in this country is in itself, an impact vision that's really, really important for the generation of founders to come.
All right. Now, this is a pretty out there question, so bear with me and see how you go. You founded Cisco's Hyper-Innovation Living Labs, which brought together diverse teams to solve complex challenges. How did the focus on diverse perspectives at Chill drive more impactful innovation? And can you share a specific example where having a diverse team contributed to solving a particularly tough problem?
Oh, that is a great question. So Chill, the mission of Chill was to bring together partners of Cisco and to stand shoulder to shoulder with the really senior leadership in those teams in order to create innovation and spin out innovations and startups really that could take industry solutions into the market. And the way I used to create the environments where that was successful was, first of all, I would source amazing companies that would join us on this journey. So a really good example is I ran what we used to call a living lab on the topic, first of all, on the topic of health and healthcare. I was living in the US at the time. I think I was pregnant. And so healthcare was, really, really close to my heart at the time, and opportunities in the Internet of Things and the connectivity of technology was really top of mind for me. But Cisco's a deep tech company. it's ubiquitous. And so we often didn't have access to the end users of our technology. They often weren't close enough to how real human beings were touched in the real world by the work that we did. Now, healthcare as a topic is far too lofty and far too broad. And so what I narrowed down was what was a really profound condition, serious condition that we could all get behind. And so we chose cancer care. And so we brought together half a dozen companies. I'm not going to do them all justice, but Apple was a part of it. Walgreens was a part of it. One of the University of California, San Francisco hospitals that was really pioneering cancer care was there, and a number of different startups even were involved. They all sent incredibly senior people to participate. So what was important about Chill was, rather than having sort of upstart hackers sort of pitch to senior leadership, we would get the senior leadership to do the hacking and sort of skip the step. We had this technique where we would build prototypes live in the room. My team would support them with the technology hacking, the physical prototyping that was needed. Prototyping is so important so we can stop arguing. One of the challenges with bringing together lots of different companies together is what I think something is different from what you think it is different from something that you think it is. And so what would happen is that I would scream that we had 45 minutes before everybody would meet their first cancer patient on the first day. So here we had all of these senior vice presidents and CTOs, and they hadn't met an end user, let alone a cancer patient, for years, for decades in some cases. And so the idea that in a second we're going to have someone here in front of us, shut up and build it, becomes, we do need to put ourselves under this pressure. It stops the little voices in our head that is telling us that we shouldn't do something. Just create something. And so, in 45 minutes time, these senior executives and handpicked founders that I'd placed on each team met their first 6, 7, 8 cancer patients. Of course, it's quite confronting. They're sick. They're often there with caregivers, and those cancer patients are telling them, I love that. I hate that. That would be invasive. I couldn't physically pull that off given my current condition. And live in the room, we were able to tear apart these prototypes and rebuild them. And at the end of the 2-day process, we had 5, 6 incredibly well resolved, tested live with end users, with everybody that needed to ship something, Walgreens and the hospital and a health insurer and Cisco. And I had placed a potential founder candidate on every team. And so at the end of that process, like a real example is at the end of that future of cancer care living lab that we ran, a startup was born. It was called Circle of. It was about supporting the community of care that grows up around a cancer patient. An African-American founder called Michael Jordan took that particular startup and ran it for about 6 years, 7 years, and it brought a lot of comfort and a lot of support to a lot of cancer patients. So it's a really good example about how this kind of work can surface different opportunities and how diverse voices, including those of our users, allows us to move much faster.
I like your example of senior executives, it being a long time since they'd spoken to the people that their companies affected or the solutions they were proposing actually affected. We see a lot of that in the finance industry because it's a regulated space. And we quite often talk about how finance companies and the people who operate them view financial products, which is a regulated term, as this thing. And I say, yeah, but your consumer doesn't view insurance as a product. It's a solution to a problem. It's really interesting. It reminded me of a story. A few years ago, got asked to meet with some executives at Macquarie Bank, and I sort of walked down to one Macquarie Place, and as I always do when I'm in Sydney, I walk through Hyde Park. I quite like it. It's very grounding. It's a great way to sort of walk into the city from Surrey Hills or whatever it might be. And I remember walking through Hyde Park that morning, got to my meeting, and throughout the meeting, they were actually mining me for information. But at the end of it, they said, we just, as a bank, we don't know how to make money from millennials. And I laughed because I thought that was a joke, and there was an awkward silence in the room. And they said, "Oh no, we have no idea how to make money from millennials. They don't engage with banking the way we know it. They're not going to borrow. They can't afford to buy a house. How do we make money out of them?" And I said to them, "When was the last time you spoke to someone on the end of these products?" I said, how did you all get here to work? And they all said, oh, we drove and we parked downstairs in the basement. And I said, well, I walked through Hyde Park and I watched, 15 teenagers skateboarding around. And I said, you need to go down there and walk through there and ask them. And I think it points out that disparity between people who lead organizations that affect everyday people and, people that don't engage with them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And of course, financial services is such an abstract comment, but you're not delivering financial services. You're delivering pocket money so kids can go buy ice cream on the weekend. You're delivering the source of a massive fight between a couple that is struggling. You're delivering a power imbalance between boomer parents and their millennial kids. You're delivering something that is really tangible in the real world. And so getting back to what is changing in the real world is one of the ways that we can help with market research. And that's, getting back to kind of what we're looking to do with HeatSeeker. You can always ship 5 different options for how kids might like to get their pocket money from their parents. You can always put something in front of them 5 different ways, structured into 5 different clever ads, and see how they perform and see who is it the mums that deliver pocket money? Is it the dads? Is it the teenagers themselves? And depending on who responds, we get the information we need about who we should market to, who we should be building features to. Is it about education? Or is it about freedom? And once we have those answers, we can help people get what they need more quickly.
In a 2017 presentation that you gave on women in STEM, you mentioned how the advertising industry's exclusion of women from early marketing of personal computers contributed to gender inequality in STEM. Do you think that the stereotype of a successful founder, quote unquote, that we perpetuate in the startup industry and in the media affects women and their participation in the tech industry today?
Yeah, so thanks for that walk down memory lane. Yeah, I had been really nerding out on what were the sources, like how do we get here? How do we get, I don't know about in Australia because I was living in the US at the time, but participation in advanced engineering and computer engineering degrees was teetering somewhere between 16 and 22% at the time, which is crisis levels as far as I'm concerned. Technology is how we are building the future. And women continue to be underrepresented in the architecture of the world that they're about to live in. And I find that terrifying. And so, I went deep into what some of the sources were. And you're right, it started with, we never know what causes it and what just follows it. But when it came to marketing toys like Sega and really early Game Boy gaming consoles, it was discovered pretty quickly that when we framed up that buying a computer for your sons, and I trip myself up because it reminds me of, some of the biases we have in the household. Technically, especially in the 80s, parents were more comfortable spending more money on toys and education tools for their sons as for their daughters. And so when this boom happened, toy companies pretty quickly worked out that when they framed up that the computer and the Segas and the Game Boys were for boys, they could charge more for them, which is really heartbreaking. We like to blame the ad industries, but, it's also where the budgets came from in families. And look, gender bias starts in the womb. Gender bias starts, there's so many parts of, bias and prejudice that come from, really deep personal family dynamics. You don't look like my dad. So who are you to lecture me about my workplace performance, as an example? So, yeah. And I have got to say, Kane, I have no idea where I'm going with the answer to this question because I went down a rabbit hole and I forgot where I was.
Well, that's okay. I have an interesting question in response to what you said. You spoke about the unfortunate reality of a marketing industry that was responding to inherent biases around gender and gender roles within society at that time. Do you have any fear that HeatSeeker, using data-driven insights from a large audience, is going to perpetuate any of the problems that you've seen in your experience?
That is a great question. What do I think? I think that the more perspectives that we have in these answers. Heat seeker experiments are shipped in front of tens and tens and tens of thousands of users for everybody's experiment. Everybody's experiment is deeply quanti. To get to statistical significance, we have to expose these experiments to tens or hundreds of thousands of participants. So we like to think that at least we have very broad participation. The other piece is that I believe there's a difference between what you choose, what ads you click on when you're doom scrolling next to your partner on the couch at 11:30 at night. I do think there's something more real about what you choose in that environment than you might choose when you're surrounded by peers. I think you're more likely to get a really authentic response. Having said that, I want users of HeatSeeker to be successful. And I need them to be successful for us to thrive. And we live in a biased world. If ads and your experiments are more successful when they exploit some of the purchase decisions that we make based on our humanity, then that is indeed going to be perpetuated in the answers that people get and the decisions that people make. So we're always going to be a reflection of the preferences of the culture, but we do like to think that the more people are participating in these decisions, and at least within a corporate structure, it's not just the loudest, widest, malest voices that are being heard, it's the users and the true diversity that is reflected in the population when it comes to making better decisions within the products that we make.
Well, if it was a good question, it was definitely a good answer. I want to have a quick chat about where you are with Birchal. You're on the board. Crowdfunding, democratizing access to capital. Do you see potential for the model to disrupt not just the source of funding, but potentially to introduce alternate models of funding that might be more focused on collective actions?
It's a great question. So you're right. Birchal and crowdsourced equity funding is an amazing and quite a disruptive asset class, if you like, within the economy. It's really exciting because it backs ventures that don't get backing in other ways. It often supports impact startups and opportunities. It often supports community initiatives. You can back your local brewer, you can back your local pub, you can back your local farm that wants to expand. And of course, those investment opportunities are really difficult to participate in. And it backs women, an inordinate sort of out of sync, 40% of all deals that are on Birchal have a female founder, which is scratching, the average asset class when it comes to female participation. So all of that is really, really exciting.
You've had really interesting experiences. You've been in high-paced startup settings quite a lot at varying levels, but you also sit on a board. So governance is obviously one of the hats that you wear. HeatSeeker is a fast-growing company. How important is strong governance in scaling that growth? And also, how do you balance the need for rapid growth with the need to have a solid governance foundation?
That's a great question. And it has the potential to be the most boring answer because people don't find great governance sexy. But
last week I spoke to Paul Smith. So I don't know if you know Paul, but he's a board futurist, and he finds governance very sexy. So we spoke about it for an hour and a half. So as long as you come in under an hour and a half, you'll be beating Paul.
I'll be killing it. Yeah. So, I sit on boards and have sat on boards because I also believe that great governance is important. That when people invest in startups like HeatSeeker, they are often pulling their investment from superannuation, from other things they could do with their money. And I think making sure that investments that people make either through HeatSeeker as a startup or through the many startups that are funded through the Birchal platform is incredibly important. And Birchal is ASIC regulated. We take that responsibility incredibly seriously. And the regime of crowdsourced equity funding, so crowdsourced equity funding in this country, in Australia, Birchal has between sort of 70 and 75% market share. So they have an incredibly important role in ensuring the entire regime is well administered, handles people's investment with enormous care, and that we do what we can to ensure that everybody who invests on Birchal has a fair and equitable experience and that they're not exposed unduly to risk taking of those that participate. Likewise, I mean, sometimes people forget within a startup context and a VC-backed context, Heatseeker is of course VC backed, is that this is a financial instrument, and those VCs have real LPs, that really put their money into these companies and are looking for returns and are looking for excellence and rigor in terms of how their money is handled and how it's treated. The communication that you share about your performance as a startup, Heatseeker shares monthly updates to all of our investors, and we share good news, but also more challenging news. When we lose a client or a deal that we wanted, or when it took us longer than we expected to close this round. So I believe that making sure that great governance is in place. Great CEOs, in my experience, thrive when they're challenged by boards that are on the outside that can look in and poke and challenge and underline different aspects of what will make you more successful. I believe in great risk registers in every company I've ever been a part of. What are the potholes that are hiding, and how long exactly do we have until we run out of money? Everybody needs to know that, down to the day when they're in a game like this. And how do you adjust the settings of the business to ensure that you are continuing to manage everybody's capital effectively?
1st of September, by the way. That's
good for you, Kane.
That's when we run a...
That's great runway. Good for you. That's great runway.
Kate, I want to wrap up with one question we ask almost all of our guests. It's a big question. Some people love, some people hate it. If you could wave a magic wand and instantly change one thing in the world that you think would lead to the greatest positive social impact, what would it be?
I'm just going to take a minute to think. Yeah, so my answer to that question, Kane, would be I believe deeply in the power of love and kindness in everything that we're doing. I just came back from Japan, literally like the day before yesterday. I got back from Japan. And I just love the kindness, the gentleness that you see everywhere when you're in that country. It's why Australians love it. It's why it's the number one travel destination, because everywhere you go, everybody is so keen to help, so eager to support you. And I believe that in our workplaces and in our commitments to our customers and in our commitments to each other as colleagues, we all share the privilege of sharing this movement in history together. And everybody has tough days and awful days and difficult times, and how we manage to support each other through those difficult times is some of the most important, social impacts that you can have. And a great example of this actually comes from my relationship with Dom. I had a real devastating personal setback a few years ago. I had a PTSD diagnosis that was really difficult for me to work through. And a lot of people around me found it really difficult to know how to support me, and often just sort of stayed back and stopped calling. And Dom, who I didn't know so well as a friend, we'd worked professionally, and we'd done, as you know, we'd been brainstorming for a long time, ways that we were going to change the world together. Dom called me every month, when I was going through my recovery. And one day Dom called me only about 6 months after the diagnosis came down, and he was made aware of it. And that day, Dom called me and said, "All right, Kate, it's time to get off the mat." And he said, "Right, there's 4 or 5 things that you could do, with your career. I've got this idea for you. I want to introduce you to the Birchal team. I think you should sit on their board. We could finally do this VC fund we've been talking about for a while. We could do this other thing. I could introduce you to these other guys that need some help. But we're not going to get off this call until you've chosen one of those that you think you're ready for." And I think that's an amazing act of kindness. Anyone could say, "I'm just going to step back and wait for you to feel better." But it's somebody entirely different that calls you and says, "You know what, it's time for you to get off the mat." And I appreciate so much his friendship. And I do believe the world needs more friendship like Dom's.
Kate, thank you so much for joining Chasing Financial Equality today.
Thanks, Kane. I had so much fun talking to you.